hotbed of native unrest, a state of constant war and struggle. There were civil wars going on in Selangor because of tin mining concessions. There was a civil war going on in Pahang. And if you read Munshi Abdullah's Kisah Pelayaran ke Timur, I really need a bit of benefit. Written in 1838. This is one of the very few reliable narrative accounts we have of what life was like in the Malay kingdoms then. Munshi Abdullah's Kisah Pelayaran ke Timur, Munshi Abdullah was a translator. He was a translator who was working for both the British and later the Dutch and the British again. His job was basically to serve as the liaison between the British colonial authorities and the local communities, including the Malays, the Chinese and Indian migrants. But he also wrote, he's the pioneer of what is contemporary Malay modern prose. And he wrote two books, one about his account of his life, and second about his journey to the east. The journey to the east was actually a journey to Kelantan. And this is because he was contracted by some Chinese merchants to send some letters to the king of Kelantan up there because some Chinese merchant ships had been impounded as a result of the civil war going on in Kelantan. So Munshi Abdullah does the eastern journey that I told you about because there were no roads up there. And on his way he stops in Pahang, he then stops in Terengganu, and he stops in Kelantan. Now, in the three states that he visits, it's very clear that a state of total civil war is on. This is the first narrative account we have of what governance in the Malay states were like then, and it's told not from the point of view of a colonial administrator, but it's told from the point of view of a colonial functionary. And in Pahang, Terengganu, and Kelantan, the image we have, the picture we have of the Malay states then was that the Malay states were basically despotic kingdoms ruled in a very arbitrary way by very weak rulers simply because there was no mode of centralized governance. Now it's very interesting to see how people like Munshi Abdullah reacted to this. Because Munshi Abdullah, despite everything, was a pious Muslim. He is also, on record, the first Peranakan Muslim in Malaysian history to have translated the Bible into Bahasa Malaysia, Bahasa Melayu, because he had a very professional outlook. And this is again, see, the outstanding features of people like Syed Sheikh Al-Hadi, Syed Tahir Jaludin and Munshi Abdullah. Again, because they were part and parcel of, they lived in the context of these straight settlements, where a certain contractual mode of being, contractual mode of existence had come about. They were contractually bound to each other, they were contractually bound to their colonial superiors, but it was a very professional relationship. In his writings, he, for instance, justifies translating the Bible into Bahasa Melayu on the grounds that he was a professional Muslim. And that, if you pay me a certain amount to do a job, I will do the job, with ikhlas. And the job in this case happened to be to translate the Bible into the Malay language. He had no problems with this whatsoever. And this is what we see when we read the writings of these first generations of modernist Malay Muslims and Peranakan Muslims who were living in the Strait settlements, in comparison to what was going on in the Malay states then. So you have then this very peculiar paradox. The first generation of Malay Muslim modernist reformers were, on the one hand, staunch defenders of Islam. They really wanted to reform Islam. They saw Islam as being in a state of crisis. But the crisis was not doctrinal, it was administrative. The crisis lay in the fact that Islam was in the wrong hands, so to speak. Islam was left to the hands of traditional feudal rulers who were weak, who were feeble, who were easily corrupted. In the same Kisah Pelayaran ke Timur, for instance, Abdullah talks about how the Malay rulers of Terengganu and Pahang were all addicted to opium. And he says, how can a ruler, how can a king who is addicted to opium be the Khalifa of Islam? He says, and his perspective is entirely that of a modern colonial Peranakan Muslim subject. And he internalizes the values of the colonial administration. You know, it's interesting to see that in all their writings, although they wrote at different times and they wrote in different genres, but the focus, the point that they emphasized again and again were efficiency, responsibility, accountability. Abdullah puts so much emphasis in a lot of his writings about the need for brevity, to be concise, to be direct, to be accountable. He talks about the dangers of corruption and how corruption, not only material economic corruption, but also moral corruption was actually destroying the spirit of Islam in the Malay world. So on the one hand, it's a very staunch Muslim critique, but on the other hand, it's couched in terms of modernity. It's couched in terms of modernity because they diagnose the crisis of Islam in terms of a lack. And the lack is found when you compare colonial rule with Malay rule. So this is the irony, the ironical situation they found